Welcome to the Sex After Kids podcast, a place for parents to come and learn together about the sometimes bumpy road back into the saddle of their sex life after adoption, birth, or joining a blended family. I'm your host, Sophia Ashley, certified sex educator and sex coach, mother and stepmother, and your totally TMI guide to becoming BFFs with your body and initiating easy and connected and confident, naked, sexy fun times. Here we are, one part science of sex, one part mindfulness magic, and one part straight up real talk to help you find the spark in yourself and your relationship after kids. I'm so glad you're here. Hello, friends. Welcome back to the Sex After Kids podcast. So glad to see you here. Today, we are in part 2 of our 3-part mini series called The Brick Wall / What the Fuck Has Happened to My Libido Since I Had Kids. We are exploring all the things that have shifted for you in your sex life since kids that are messing with your libido and sexy time connections with your partner. I welcome you to join me in taking a great big deep breath and just landing in this moment. Maybe you're doing dishes, maybe you're driving the car, maybe you're relaxing on the couch. Who am I kidding? You're not relaxing, but hopefully you're having a good time listening to me yab. So if you're like brick wall, what? Make sure you go back to episode 1 in the mini series. But the long and short story here is that we are imagining a brick wall between you and naked, sexy fun times with your partner. And what we're trying to do is put a label on each specific brick so that we can start to name the specific things that are in the way for you. What's your brick wall? Find some wiggly bricks, pull them out so we can make a hole in the wall and climb through to the fun times on the other side. Today, we're looking at dimension 2. So last episode, we looked at the physical dimension of change. Today, we're talking about what has shifted in your emotions and in your relationship connection. So first, let's talk about one of the best concepts I've heard in a long time around this. And of course, it came from the magnificent Esther Perel, which is this notion of welcoming the third, right? So on an emotional level, at a very basic level, we have gone from a 2 where you and me are the only things that I need to prioritize. And we welcomed a 3rd or a 4th or a 5th or a 6th or a 7th or a however many's have joined the party. And all of a sudden, the attention is split. The focus is split. Your body is even physically being split and shared with other beings. And that is going to have a shift, right? We've gone from a dyad to a triad. In particular, there's a dynamic that comes between the birthing parent and the child, and the non-birthing parent and the child. And part of this has to do with gender scripts or societal expectations. So when we talk about women giving birth and men not giving birth, we also talk about a lot of the expectations that we load onto women and mothers about how they are more nurturing, they're the caregivers, they're the primary parent, and how we load a ton of emotional labor onto them. And how men are just kind of the side piece that makes it happen and brings in money, right? So when we operate with that kind of gender script at play, we're already going to see a big shift in the dynamic of our relationship. And my dad put this really well when I had a drunken conversation with him one time, late one night, very rare one. And I can't remember the question that I asked him, but I just remember him being like, not in a possessive way, but before the kids were born, your mom's boobs were like things that I got to play with. And then the kids were born and I was not allowed to touch them anymore, right? So there's a level of access to your partner's physical body that can change, but there's also a level of access to their love and connection. And also when we're in very like codependent relationships, and we'll have to do a whole other episode on this, but when we grow up in this model of relationship that Esther Perel talks about a lot as well, which is this idea that my partner is supposed to be everything for me and I'm supposed to be everything for them. They're supposed to give me everything that I need: love, affection, sex, intellectual stimulation, hair, you name it. When that spotlight goes from being like on your partner to now on your newborn, your partner is like feeling the loss of the spotlight. They are feeling the loss of that heat. This dynamic likely shows up slightly differently in queer and LGBTQ2S relationships. However, I can't imagine that it's overwhelmingly different, because this like cis hetero perspective about relationships and about like childcare is pretty dominant like in our culture, right? So this is where we want to have some empathy for the non-birthing person who can feel like they got shoved off the pedestal and kind of replaced, you know? And there's a physical thing that happens here, in particular when someone is breastfeeding and chest feeding, especially if they're exclusively breastfeeding or chest feeding, where if I'm breastfeeding my son all day, I'm getting all the oxytocin, I'm getting all the dopamine, I'm touching beautiful soft skin all day, I'm eye gazing, right? None of it is sexual, but it is all physiologically doing the same thing to my body. Not exactly, because it's not orgasmic, but it's giving me the same feel-good hormones that I would get from sex and from intimacy and connection with my partner. So I'm at home all day. I've been breastfeeding. I've been eye gazing. I've been touching soft toes. My partner comes home and my cup, my intimacy cup, my connection cup is full. I have not left any for my partner. And they've been at work all day and they are looking for some love, some connection, some touch, some eye gazing, some butt slapping, some whatever. And I am not needing this, right? I would say that was particularly true for me with my daughter because I exclusively breastfed her. So there were very few bottles. My husband wasn't bonding with her in the same way. It was basically my daughter on my tit 95% of the time. But I would also say, interestingly, and this is something I want to do more research on around this, you know, all the like boy mom dynamics that we're seeing and a lot of the very like unhealthy boy mom dynamics that we're seeing in social media trends, is I have a very different feel like when I'm lying in bed with my son who's 3 and I'm cuddling him and we're snuggling each other's noses and he's telling me that he loves me. Um, it's not the same feeling as it is with my partner, but there's a felt sense of like a that he's almost the love that I typically give to my partner is being directed to my son. I don't quite know how to put my finger on this, and I'm curious if you have a little human with a penis in your family, if you feel this. I am equally affectionate with my daughter, and yet I don't feel like the affection that I give her takes away from the affection that I give my husband. And I don't think that's true with my son, but there's a weird like sense of that, if that makes sense. I don't know if I'm making sense here, but there's an interesting dynamic at play here. The bottom line is that both on a physical level and in an emotional level, it is absolutely expected that there's going to be a shift in your relationship dynamic. And I think one of the most important things that I want to say here is, in particular in the culture of motherhood that we've created, in this like all-encompassing, again, kind of codependent, like your child's supposed to become your everything and you're supposed to like give up all of yourself to be this parent. And I know we're challenging these narratives now, but it's the undercurrent that's there, is we forget that we have to keep our own oxygen mask on in order to be the parent that we want to be. And I would also argue that the oxygen mask has to go on us first, then on our relationship, and then on our children. Because if we want to stay together which is what our children need, then we got to keep the oxygen mask on our relationship, which means we have to give it priority. We have to give it time. We got to give it intention. If I'm the person at home breastfeeding all day, I got to make sure I leave room in my cup for my partner to fill it, or I got to leave a little bit of spotlight left for my partner. Because so often what happens is that spotlight goes to my kid, and then the kid turns 5 and the kid doesn't want my spotlight anymore. And I go over to my partner and they're gone. Or I'm like, who the fuck are you? Or any number of things, right? So it's a natural thing. It's a normal thing. And I think we need to challenge the narrative of like completely eviscerating ourselves and our relationships for our kids, and remember that, my husband went to a wedding when I first met him. It was an Indigenous First Nations wedding here locally with some very good friends of his. And I believe it was some elders at the wedding who talked about how marriage is actually for the protection of children, for the protection of the next generation. And this is a beautiful sentiment. And I feel it so much in my bones, in the sense that we're here to create a union that, if we want children in it, which if you're here, you have children in it, is here to like foster and support and raise and create and protect these little people. And I can't actually do that by totally like letting go of myself and my relationship, because what we end up with instead is divorce. And 1 in 5 couples get divorced. And guess what? Shitty sex life is on the top of the list of reasons for why people get divorced. So we can avoid that with a little bit of intention and attention, right? So, what are some emotional dimensions, other dimensions here that have shifted? As we'll see, there's a fair amount of interplay with the physical dimensions. So when our hormones are shifting, again, whether it's perimenopause, whether it's breastfeeding, whether it's Hashimoto's, whether it's whatever, that's going to shift our mood. I know, postpartum depression and anxiety and other mental health stressors for either parent. So just general depression, seasonal affective disorder is a big one in our house. Any of these, they can happen anytime. They're especially prevalent in the early years, but postpartum here can be up to 7 years later. We've got to remember that postpartum depression can affect dads or male partners or any partner. It doesn't just have to be the partner who gave birth, but any kind of situation hormonally or emotionally that's affecting your sense of self, that's affecting your ability to connect to joy and to pleasure, or that's got you in fight or flight and anxiety all the time, is of course going to impact your ability to connect with a partner and to connect with pleasure, right? Hormones are particularly interesting here because I don't know about any of you, but I am on a path of learning more about my cycle, my menstrual cycle, and about learning more about like how I feel in the world and how I show up in the world in each phase of my cycle. And I am starting to call my luteal phase, which for me with my Hashimoto's is like a good 2 to 3 weeks sometimes of my month, is kind of my like, I fucking hate you and everything about you annoys me phase. So menstrual cycle for people with uteruses is an important piece, because I go through like some pretty heavy resentment and frustration with my partner, or like annoyance, like half of every month, right? And I could use that as an excuse to like never be intimate with him. Or again, I could understand that this is one of my bricks. It's worse because of my Hashimoto's, right? And I can work with or around it, or figure out how to get rid of that brick, right? So again, it's about noticing that pattern, noticing that relationship, and then understanding what to do about it. Other things in the emotional realm would be body image issues and in general, your sense of self, right? So whether this is newly postpartum and you've got that new pooch, or you've got that C-section scar, or weight is redistributing itself in different ways, or you're jeans just aren't fitting anymore and you're very caught up in the narrative of getting back to your pre-baby body, or whether this is a decade later and the weight still, quote unquote, hasn't come off, or perimenopause and menopause are hitting you and you just feel like an alien in your own skin, or you're a trans person, or you're dealing with body dysmorphia, or you're coming out of the closet and processing a new like sexual or gender identity. Any of those things, any of those like heavy internal processing that we're doing around body image and sense of self are going to have an impact on our ability to want to be naked with someone, to want to be vulnerable with that person, to process sensory stimuli, to be touched. I still don't feel super sexy these days, and I get confused that my partner can look at me and think I'm just like this foxy lady. It kind of blows my mind, and that's about me working on that. And if I had a nickel for every time a woman told me, when I lose 10 pounds, I'll, be ready to have sex again, I'd be a rich lady, friends. We don't have to wait until we've lost the weight. We don't have to wait until we feel super comfortable in our body. There are things that we can do to work with those bricks or to ditch them, right? What else have we got? Well, also in this realm are things like the word mother and the word sexy, or the word mother and the word sexual, or the word parent and sexual. Do these two things go together? That can make us feel uncomfortable. Some of us get uncomfortable with the idea of like making out in front of our kids. We don't want our children to see us being intimate, even if it's just kissing and eye gazing, or we're petrified they're going to walk in on us and we're going to scar them for life. Two different things, but equally there. Like, how many times have you shied away from your partner nuzzling up to you because you like just didn't want the kids to see that? And I would argue that they do need to see it. They do need to see what healthy, loving intimacy looks like. They don't need to see you doing the deed, but they do need to see you kissing and touching and snuggling. And if you gross them out, like, great. I want to hear my teens go, ew, guys, because I want them to see that that is what is part of a relationship, right? Other pieces that can fall here is just like comfort with sex in general, right? So we've got an episode coming up around sex ed, and we've all got baggage when it comes to what we feel is allowed and not allowed, what we feel is normal and not normal, what we feel is okay and not okay when it comes to sex. And those limitations can hold us back, and we can develop new ones when we have a kid. So early postpartum, we might deal with me being afraid that it's going to hurt the first couple times, or my partner being afraid that he's going to hurt me, which can just be an overall general turnoff for everyone. But also like there's that narrative of like, oh my God, my vagina, this is this big, huge, loose cavern now. And maybe that comes from me, or maybe that comes from him. And while that is complete fucking bunk and we need to get rid of that, I also just want to say, like, if that's one of your partner's bricks, because that's what he's been taught, like, let's not write that off. Because when we write it off and when we judge it off the bat, we don't get to go through the opportunity of naming it as a brick and then ditching the brick. If we just skip over the fact that it's even a brick at all, we're not going to get rid of it. So sometimes in this exploration process, and like for guys and gals and for whoever, like, you might find some bricks that you feel a little embarrassed that they are bricks. There's something like wrong with that perspective or wrong with that way of thinking about it, but it's still a belief that's niggled its way into you from somewhere. And so this is where we need to have compassion for ourselves, and instead of judging the brick, just notice that it's there. Notice, I've got some worries about how it's going to feel in there now that a baby's come out. Or I feel weird about having sex with this person now that she's made babies for me, right? Like, we have this whole Madonna horror complex, and your partner may have change the way he wraps his head around thinking about you as a sexual person now that you've made a baby. And again, there's no right or wrong in that. We just need to notice it and then go, is that a belief that serves me? Like, oh, if I don't think of my wife as a sexual being anymore because she had a baby, is that serving me? Well, no. So how am I going to change that? Right. We can also have a lot of emotions around the changes. And again, like we talked about in the first realm, like my boobs used to be a thing to play with, and now they feed people, and so I don't want to play with them anymore. They're not a toy anymore to me. So there can be kind of these reactions to changes in identity and changes what's happening to our body. Fear, like I said, as well. I mean, really what I like to underlie here is when we're talking about the bricks in the emotional realm, we underplay this idea that like fucking everything has changed after you've had a kid. Your priorities have changed, your sense of identity has changed, your relationship has changed, the amount of time you have has changed. And we still have this narrative or this idea that we're going to get back to a pre-baby body, back to a pre-baby relationship, back to a pre-baby version of ourselves. And instead, we need to really embrace these ideas of matrescence and petrescence, which is just this idea that it's a rite of passage, just like puberty, where you fundamentally change. And so you're not going back to your pre-baby body friend, and you're not going back to your pre-baby relationship friend. You're going to create a new relationship, and you're going to make peace and make friends with your new body. And that is how we make that way forward. So a lot of these emotional struggles come from fighting that surrender and that acceptance and shoulding all over ourselves and really falling prey to a lot of those great expectations that we talk about, and those like myths and narratives that we have about sex, right? Another really big one is gender scripts, and this falls into the cultural dimension as well as the spiritual one. But what I'm talking about here is when you're together and you have no children, many relationships will find their way into a pattern that feels equitable. What I mean by that is both people are working, both people take turns doing dishes, both people take turns doing, their fair share of the labor in the house. And there's a balance in your relationship that feels good. Even if it's fairly like traditional or conservative or blue job, pink job, whatever you want to call it, when there's no kids in the house, maybe it feels good that we both work and you do the cars and the home repairs and those kinds of things, and I cook the food, and that feels good for us, right? When kids come along, a lot of that can get shot to hell. Or rather, what we find is that we can fall into scripts that we didn't realize were operating. And so a lot of what were equitable relationships will fall out of balance or equilibrium. And what we'll see is women or femmes or uterus owners becoming primary parents, primary child caregivers, or care providers, also working, but doing most of the cooking, most of the labor, and their partner is a helper. Their partner is a babysitter and a helper. Instead of this idea that we both run this home and we both raise these children and we're going to do this in an equitable way. And the interesting thing here to note is I've read some research that says that traditional, again, or conservative couples tend to be happier in this realm because they both have the same ideology and viewpoint about who should hold which jobs. Even though they haven't negotiated it, there's an agreement. And so as long as there's an agreement that everyone feels good about, it doesn't matter what the balance is. Everyone's feeling good about it. More liberal couples know that they don't want the quote unquote traditional or conservative or like standard way of doing things, but they have not defined what it is that they want instead. And so they fall into these more traditional patterns, knowing they don't want them, or one person doesn't want them, without a notion of how to create a replacement. And so a big thing that happens is women in particular, primary parents in particular, child, what do I say? My word there for people who gave birth in particular end up taking on more of the load. And here's the deal, yo, like when you have a baby, but you're taking care of two children because your partner is also a child, that is not fucking sexy. Not only that, you're also way overstimulated, way overstressed, way drowning in emotional labor. So you've got the extra load of stress and labor, plus you're not feeling supported, plus you're not feeling seen, plus you're not feeling like a team, plus it's just not fucking sexy to have sex with someone that you're taking care of. And again, when you're in caregiving mode, 95% of the time or 99.9% of the time, sex feels like another duty of care that you're giving another person. It feels like another thing you have to do for other people instead of a time where you get to receive and enjoy. So, how we balance chores and emotional labor in our relationship is a very big piece of the puzzle for modern couples. And if you want a way forward on this brick, please read the book Fair Play. I think by Eve Rodsky is her name. It's a wonderful system for how to negotiate how you want to share the jobs in your relationship more equitably. It's not 50-50, it's what it looks like for your relationship. I will note this book, disappointingly, is written more for women to read and then engage their partners into. The second half of the book is a little bit more dude friendly, but the first half is pretty intense because she decided to kind of go at it from the perspective of how she discovered this system and her own dissatisfaction. And she shares how her relationship was fairly equitable and then it was not. So her perfectly capable husband became very incapable as soon as a baby came into the world, which is just nonsense, right? Anyways, my husband and I are playing with it right now. I will do some more episodes in the future about how it is going for us, but I highly recommend. And just to underplay that, like, a lot of this happens because of like subconscious programming, and our way forward again is through communication, talking about our needs and challenging the way we've been doing things and just being more intentional. So instead of letting things naturally happen, we're going to be intentional about how we want things to happen. So you can see a lot of themes here in the emotional are either linked to physical, whether it's hormones, depression, sleep, fatigue, those kinds of things, or more related to cultural programming around gender scripts and how we relate, things like how we were not taught to communicate about sex, the shame and taboo around sex, also our relationship to pleasure, right? What is your connection to rest and play? Do you feel like you deserve play? Do you feel like you are deserving of rest? Most of us are uncomfortable resting, right? We are stuck in this go, 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 go mode, especially as busy parents. Sometimes we end up with an evening on the couch and we don't even know what to fucking do with ourselves or how to enjoy that time. And we're just sort of like buzzing. Um, as a capitalist society, we're taught to work, 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 do, 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 do. We are taught that play and pleasure are things that we earn after hard work. And so we can have a hard time accepting or being comfortable with, which is so weird, the like pleasure and relaxation and connection that comes from sex, right? Few more thingies here, of course, shame and trauma, the big T word. We'll talk more deeply about trauma and sex later, but for now, fucking obviously, If you have had a sexual assault, if someone's ever hit on you in a way that felt uncomfortable, if you left any kind of sexual situation not feeling super great about what happened, even if it's with your loving partner and there was just that one time you decided to like go for it because you didn't want to bother saying no, you can add a brick or two for this one, right? This relates very deeply to nervous system and how safe your body feels being naked and being sexual with itself or with another human being. We all have at least one of these bricks because we all feel a certain level of shame. But if we're a survivor, if we've been harmed in any way, if we've been catcalled, if we've been touched in ways that we didn't like, and this goes for any person in any body, then we have to give ourselves a brick for this, right? This is about experiencing a boundary being transgressed or knowing that you've transgressed boundaries and feeling weird and awkward and uncomfortable about that and not knowing how to process it safely as well. So, in summary, we've covered a lot of ground today. The emotional realm, right, covers any feelings we have about ourselves and our partners and our relationship in general. But it also covers like our feelings about sex in general, pleasure in general. And there's a big overlap between the physical realm because of the overlap with the nervous system and hormones, which plays a huge big picture, as well as a lot of the cultural narratives and like mindsets that we have about sex, which is why I focus on these things so much in my practice. That is it for today. I am curious how many new bricks you may have added to your wall today, or what some of your biggest takeaways or surprises are from this episode. Make sure to DM me over on Instagram or hit reply in the comments. We'll see you next time.
This is the part where we do the end bit, right? Okay, friends, let's take a mindfulness minute here. One big deep breath in through the nose and one big deep full body sigh out the mouth. Voila. Your nervous system says merci. Thanks so much for being here today. I hope your head and your heart have something new to consider. No husbands were harmed in the making of this podcast, and a big thank you to my husband for his sound help and original music compositions. Love you, babe. You can catch us on Instagram at The Happy V Project for tools, tips, and anecdotes. You can join the newsletter for weekly-ish dispatches from my bedroom and head to thehappyvaginaproject.com to learn how you can work with me. Catch you next time.